Hey everyone, Brian here for Ginger Prime, and if you're a returning subscriber, what's up Soul Nation? Thanks for coming back and checking out this Phantasy Star interview video. We've got a lot to cover, and just like always with any of these articles and interviews, I'd like to make sure that you go give the link a click, so I'll include it in the description below for you, so you can go give Polygon and this article some traction. I think it's important, so that lets all these people and outlets know that we want more Phantasy Star Online content in our lives. So this is going to be a dive into that article and that post, and it's going to be a little bit. So hopefully you really enjoy. So get some coffee, get some water, come back, kick back, relax, and listen hopefully to the wonderfully narrated and not anyway mispronounced words from Ginger Prime here. Now, before we do this dive, I have an honest query, and I want to know your feedback. I want to know your thoughts. I'm toying around with the idea of moving all of these Phantasy Star posts 100% into the podcast PSO Radio. If you haven't heard about the podcast, link will be one of the top links in the description for Ginger Gaming Radio. That's where I post that, Crystal Core Radio, a couple other podcasts for New World and for Blue Protocol, things like that. I like doing podcasts, obviously. I think understatement of the year, but I think they also, a podcast with the discussion element helps kind of form really great conversations around video games. I think that's why podcasts are so prevalent within the gaming space, and I honestly would love to know your thoughts here. Obviously, posting these videos here on Ginger Prime are great because I love talking about them. And the question is that do you like seeing them here as frequently as they happen, or do you want to see them more as a part of that podcast and more Ginger Prime having that guides? And honestly, the idea is that if there's massive news, like hey, here's the release date for New Genesis, we would talk about it here, especially because it's quick turnaround. But I like to keep podcasts non-sensationalized, really focused in on the information and the discussion. And so that's kind of the balance that I'm having. I do apologize. This is a longer than normal intro, especially if you're just here for the information. If that is the case, you can always check the playhead of all my videos. I try to put in those chapter marks for everybody so that you can jump to the information you need. I don't want to keep you here longer than you need. I want to make sure I respect your time. So that out of the way, that question out of the way, I think it's time we actually do dive into the article itself and the questions, namely because it's important. Now, obviously, this starts off just talking about kind of recapping the last couple of weeks of them, hey, this is what they've been doing. They've been covering Phantasy Star Online 2, and it's been really a pleasure to get some insight into the original PSO and more. But let's go ahead and just start with the questions and dive into the answers. So Polygon asks, please introduce yourself and in your own words, describe your role. So, gosh, I really wish I knew Japanese. We're going to call him Naka. Says, my name is Naka, and I am part of the Sega number 3 development team, and I'm the producer of the North American release of PSO2, and I work as the liaison for various teams in development of the North American version. So how long have you been working with PSO2 and the team in general? I've been on and off with the team. I started with Phantasy Star Universe in Japan, and then I also worked on the release of North American Xbox version of PSU. And what other projects have you worked on with Sega? And I've worked on some smaller titles, but otherwise I work mostly on mobile games. So why were you assigned and handled the Western release of PSO2? Well, it says I'm the director for the US release of the Xbox version, as well as the Asian release of PSO2, which was released prior to the US version. So I'm the sort of localization specialist. So they ask, is it a relief now that PSO2 is finally out in the West for all English-speaking PSO fans? I can speak for myself and say, yeah, fans have been asking for it for years. He says there's a sense of relief because there was a lot of planning that went into the development. For example, Sega US and Sega Japan took surveys from fans about what they wanted in the game. But as an online game, I feel the real challenge was to be maintaining the service going forward. So what were your impressions of how the beta test went in the US? So in February, we got the closed beta, and there was an unexpectedly high number of participants. And we heard a lot of players say that they were waiting 8 long years for this release. So we're really happy about how the beta test went. So is this one of the reasons why the Western servers were separate from the Japanese servers, so that you could roll out later episodes at an appropriated pace rather than dump all the Western players into the same servers to play in Asia who have experienced the content already? Or did that have to do with the consideration of data speeds? He says it's a little bit of both. The reason why we put it into different servers for the US release is to control the rollout of the stories and also due to server capacity. The ease of play is one of the selling points of the game. and the distance of the servers of the players affects latency, so we knew we wanted to have those servers physically closer to our players in North America. And although there are hardcore fans who will play regularly and explore all the content in the North American region, there are still many players who are not familiar with the franchise and who didn't feel it would be fair to release 8 years worth of content all at once. So it's a little bit of both. As you say, PSO2 did come out 8 years ago, but people were wondering why it took so long between the Japanese release and the Western release. Did it have to do with the microtransaction system and the in-game purchases being very different for Japan? And he says, the in-game transactions were not the reason. We all wanted to release PSO2 in North America shortly after the release in Japan, but our reason for the delay of the US version was the structure of the operating team necessary to operate the online game. We couldn't risk releasing the game in a new territory without the right infrastructure in place, so it took time to set up operations for North America. Things like a way of communicate service updates, policies for in-game promotions, communication tools for maintenance and notifications, having a team placed for monitoring both servers and users, as well as a customer service team, and the operational tools were not in place, were below the standards of what was offered for the PSO2 in Japan. Now, urban legend is that the localization was actually done a long time ago, and there were other technical reasons for the delay. The issue was not technical in terms of localization. It was completed recently in preparation for this release. The biggest problem was that we weren't able to facilitate all aspects of the operation. Is there any content where you need to adjust for the Western release? Presumably, you won't be bringing over the Japanese-specific collaboration content like convenience store brandings or drinks. That makes sense. But do you have any plans for Western-themed items and collaborations? We aren't able to roll out in the same way as we did in the Japanese release, but we were able to do cross-collaborations in the US as well. And we probably won't be doing cross-promotions with convenience stores and drinks as we did in Japan. But some of the things that are interesting in doing some cross-promotions with other anime programs or franchises. In Japan, you have the convenience stores in every corner, but in the United States, everything is much more spread out in terms of those collaborations. So probably not. But in terms of people or branding, we would be interested in doing that kind of sponsorship. Now, besides the added in-depth of customization options and the more nimble gameplay, players can jump finally into the game still very much captures the spirit of the original PSO, with other Phantasy Star games released since and have not. What do you think PSO2 brings with it from the original PSO that was specifically do you feel was unique to PSO2? He says, as you mentioned, the jumping of the specific special combos and the relatively short battles and the quest times are things that we brought to PSO. Editor's note, the original PSO often subjected players to long, drawn-out quests that could take upwards of an hour and a half of solo play. It also maintains the sense of community through the icon chat. Another example is that even if you are playing solo, you can read the dialogue of the other players in the chat box, so it doesn't feel so lonely. Symbol chat and other features were preserved from the original, and we felt like those features enhanced the social aspect of the game. These communication systems were all inherited from the original game. For the North American release, we expanded on that even more by adding voice chat, which isn't offered in the Japanese version. Now, did you have to make any changes to the visuals in the game, or just for the localization of the Western version? For the Xbox release, we had to make it 4K compatible, so there were graphical enhancements that they made. Now, did you create a lot of work for the development team? It wasn't a lot of work, but the team was surprised by how beautiful the enhancements made the game look. It was helpful to have the ability to develop and optimize for a fixed platform like Xbox One rather than the Madrid permutations that a gaming PC might present. Now, for the Japanese version, it was a multi-platform release, PC, PS4, and PSO2, and we were already optimized to provide the best results regarding which platform they're playing on. The focus was more on how to bring out the strengths of the platform. Now, are you planning any PSO2 related merchandise or physical versions for the West? Not currently, but if there's a demand for it, we might change. And if we organize offline events and we want to have merch available, we'll consider making merch for something like that. There isn't really a channel or a way for us to selling merchandise, but that might change in the future what we can sell on the Japanese market and to our North American users. Now, you've already done the Xbox collaboration where players could unlock Xbox branded t-shirt in game. Presumably you have more crossover content like that planned? Yes, absolutely. Will you be able to move your character from ship to ship in case of your friends are on a different ship than you? No, it is not possible right now, but we've heard this request from other players as well, and it is something we plan on rolling out. It's possible currently in Japan, but even in Japan, you can only move servers or transfer data once a week during maintenance. There isn't a specific window and frequency at which you can do this, and that will remain the same for the North American region as well. Now, when the original PSO came out, online games weren't really established yet. PSO changed that. With PSO2, playing games online now is practically the standard. And now that you did the hard work in pioneering things 20 years ago, you could really focus in on the design of the game. What were the design priorities for PSO2? The first thing was to expand in PSO2 was the character creation system that previously wasn't possible in MMOs. The next focus was that we wanted to make it easy and accessible for players as possible. As mentioned earlier, since there are a lot of solo players in the game, we wanted to make the communication feature as seamless as possible so that players could join the other players with ease and not to have to spend a lot of time gathering a party. In PSO2, we've created a party area where you can just join parties in progress without the downtime spent organizing a group that you might have had with the original game. Another area is that PSO2 is a cross-platform play, and in Japanese, the version already has it, on PC, PS4, Vita, and Switch, and PSO2 ES, which is the mobile version. You can play the same character across the different platforms, and nowadays this might not be so unique, but 8 years ago it was quite revolutionary. Now for the US version, we just announced a Windows 10 version in May, and then we'll be able to play across Xbox and PC, and we hope for future platforms as well, looking at you PlayStation 4 players. Now this really shows a respect for the player's time, since you basically make the game as accessible and accommodating as possible. And this leads to the next question, which is about the decision to go free to play for PSO2. And it makes a lot of sense now, since the person can easily download the client for free on whatever platform they want to play on and move over to the other version easily without having to pay $60 for each. Was this all part of the strategy to get people playing across the many platforms as possible? He says, that was naturally part of it. 8 years ago, when we first began preparation for PSO2 for release in Japan, when you think of RPGs, Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest are predominant Japanese role-playing games. So we had to think, how are we going to compete with those? And if the key to that was the ease of access, two things that came up that were provided on multiple platforms, so we could offer it as to people with any game console. And the second idea was to make it free to play, which makes it easier to enter because there's no upfront charge. Also, 8 years ago, most of the MMOs that were coming out of Korea and China, and they were able to, they were all pay-to-win style. And providing PSO2 as a free-to-play, we wanted to keep the quality of the game, but we also wanted to make it a profitable business, and we wanted to move that free-to-play was a viable business format that could also be profitable. As a trend, I think that they're right on target to make a free-to-play game, and if you're seeing that a lot more in the industry these days, we were the pioneers of offering a free-to-play without compromising the quality of the game. Now, back when PSO2 was first released in Japan, there was a lot of controversy around free-to-play games because kids were racking up huge charges on their parents' credit cards in games like Puzzles and Dragons, so much so that the government actually stepped in and cracked down on the random item generation business. Now, PSO2 was not really that kind of game, but it did those added government regulations affect the monetization design of PSO2 in any way? And he says, it didn't really affect the way we designed the game because we weren't focused on the gacha style of gameplay. We've been waiting so long for PSO2 to come out in the West, 8 years now, and it's interesting that you decided to release here first on Xbox One. It's interesting because the Xbox One is basically the last year of its life, and as Microsoft transitions to the Xbox Series X. Did you launch on Xbox One because you knew that the Series X would be backwards compatible, and that people would be able to carry over their progress over to the next console? Or did Microsoft approach you because they were hungrier for content than Sony is for the PlayStation 4? And he says, Microsoft was very cooperative in releasing PSO2, and to expand on that, they were interested in PSO2 and providing us with Agile, their programming software, which is not really a technical reason. But in terms of moving the game over to Xbox, it wasn't any easier. But they really supported putting the game on Xbox. It's not that the Xbox is specifically difficult, but there are some features that had to be adjusted specifically for Xbox, and it was originally developed on PC, so it was relatively straightforward to bring it over to the other system. And so that was a long interview, and hopefully you've enjoyed it. Again, back to the kind of what we opened up the video with. What are you guys thinking about in terms of keeping news here on Ginger Prime, or moving all of this more into a podcast? Or again, I think, like I said, my thought would be if I do that, I'd still keep the biggest news, the big, hard-hitting, exciting stuff here for the channel to have that discussion with you guys as it's breaking, as it's happening, and things like that. Anyway, any and all thoughts, I'd love to hear down in the comments below. Would love to just have those conversations with you, because that's what it's about. Welcome again. Thank you to everybody. Thank you to WG Productions. Thank you to L. Thank you to Chris. Thank you to everybody who's hit that membership button, keeping mid-roll ads off of this channel. So it's important. I do appreciate the support. I love you guys. I hope you have a fantastic day. I'll see you in my next video. But until then, take care. This video is sponsored by me, Ginger Prime. Hopefully you'll check out my podcast channel, Ginger Gaming Radio, which we have lots of guests, lots of great conversations, and even more highlights. Links are in the description below. Let me know what you think. Thanks.